Well, it's obviously a great pleasure to welcome all of you and to see in our temple here so many friends from so many different colonies. Obviously, we're celebrating an extraordinary weekend with Swami Kriyananda's presence among us later this afternoon and last night and the night before, and really for all eternity. But this is a sort of special way that we're celebrating it right now, and it gives a glow to everything. This is probably going to be the easiest Sunday service we've ever had. Everybody's energy is already uplifted. I was thinking of an interesting story about Swami Kriyananda that, for those of you who are new, of course, Swami's the founder of our community, a direct disciple of Paramhansa Yogananda. I was thinking of a story of Swamiji that didn't actually make it into the published version of my book, although if I ever do a second volume, it'll get in. And the story, it had several parts to it, but the essence of it was this. Swamiji, on many occasions, people have had dreams of him in which he's come and he's spoken to them, and Swami once commented just very casually about it. He said, it's interesting, he said, because he has no awareness of the fact that he's visiting people in their dreams, but he said, isn't it interesting how often he will say to someone in a dream something that he would have said to them if he'd had the opportunity to say it. Someone in the crowd, when he was telling that story, they said, do they listen to you? And then they added, only in your dreams, sir. But on another occasion, I was then asking him just about this quality of things happening in dreams that seem real, and someone had come to me and said I had given them advice that I'd been wanting to give them in a dream, but that I'd never said it in person. And I said, sir, it seems so, what is happening in those circumstances when you have no awareness? And his answer was so fascinating to me. It said so much. He said, he contemplated for a minute, and then he said this, the superconscious never sleeps. Think about it for a minute. The superconscious is not related to the physical body. The superconscious is that dimension, the non-physical part of ourselves that links us to the spirit. It's the mechanism through which the infinite reaches us, and then we reach out to the infinite. And it's not affected by birth and death. Most of you, I'm sure, heard Swami last night just talking casually about sloughing off the body and what difference does it make and who cares how we go, because there is a reality that is our self-awareness that just merely inhabits this body and is never in any way changed by it. That's the superconscious self. So the body gets sleepy because it's a physical thing and it has all the brain and all this stuff, so it goes to sleep. But infinite awareness never sleeps. I mean, it's really weird if you think about it. Why would it ever go to sleep? So Swamiji says the dimension of ourself, that here we are, those of us who have committed ourselves as best we can to serving people. I'm sure many of you will resonate with my own personal story in this very small way. Swami was talking about it last night when he said he wanted to be a writer. He wanted to share truth with people in words, but he had this terrible trouble because he didn't know what truth was. So there were no real words he could commit to putting on the page because he didn't have that certainty. And I, as a young person, I just had such a desire to help people, but I was hampered by the fact that I myself was an idiot. And it just was like, I was just stumbling around making so many mistakes, and it was like, what good could I be to anyone? And I would try a little of this and a little of that, and it just all crumbled like ashes in front of me. And it wasn't until literally I saw Swami Kriyananda that I understood that there was something extremely tangible that you could give. In my experience, as I tell in that book, I made that decision just literally when he walked in the room and I saw him for the first time, because what it was that he was giving, I received before he spoke. It didn't come out. The words were what he pasted on, as someone said to me yesterday, so that we could see the vibration. So we could understand the vibration, but what was given first was a vibration of consciousness. So when I first saw him, he walked into a room, I felt that vibration of consciousness, and I felt that's what it was that I wanted. I was 22 years old, and my mind was like a bowl of spaghetti that had been stirred up a lot, but just sort of somewhere buried in the bottom of that, there was this kernel of clarity that just had to wiggle its way, up through all that confusion to get out and say what it wanted to say. But Swamiji was saying in this question about the dreams, he said, you're committed to helping. A person is committed to helping. Just because you go to sleep, your essential nature doesn't change. And so if there's any way for that vibration to keep going, it will find a way. And what the ego knows is so little of what we actually know. Swamiji made an interesting other comment about himself at one point. He says he feels like realization is just the gradual coming to understand what was always happening. And that there's always this pure vibration, and we just become more and more aware of it. It's not like anything actually changes except our what? Realization. Isn't that the right word? So in our dreams, we're just the same people, just seeking channels. So when other people are asleep and they're more receptive and Swami's wanting to help, he'll wander around and help. Master wanders around, Christ, all the great masters do, and even all of us. We're giving to one another to the extent that we are. And the obvious question after that was, well, then when we die, it's just the same, isn't it? He says, oh, yes, it's no vacation. Don't think about it. Even if the astral world is nice, it's sort of just like going to Hawaii for a couple of weeks. It's relaxing and it's uplifting, but sooner or later we get back to work. I know just before, and many of you know our friend Paula, who died a few years ago, who is such an angel person. And I recall when, just in the days just before Paula passed away, she knew she was dying, and there was about 3 days where we had what we called Paula's passing party, where everybody got together and celebrated that Paula was about to leave her body. And she talked to Swami and she said something, I hope they have a job for me up in the astral world, she said. I don't want to stop serving just because I'm not going to be Paula anymore. And it was just like that. That's just what our reality is. And then we have this extraordinary story today about Jesus. This is, so often I'll say, many of you come every week, this is my favorite story in the Bible. Well, this is one of my favorite stories in the Bible. The scene is just so extraordinary. By this time, you see, Jesus had gotten their attention because he was doing a lot of miracles. He was curing the blind and curing the sick, and that gets people's notice. It's very interesting. When Master first came to America in 1920, he was a young man, and it was 1920. It wasn't, 2008, karma, gurus, India. It was all extremely new. And he just came in a very calculated way. And there's some, and I don't mean that egoically, but in a conscious way, there's some accounts of the life of Jesus that are just like that. And you read parts in the Bible. He sent a few ahead to announce this is Jesus. He sent a few ahead to announce to the villages that he was coming. And then he sent two by two, he sent them out here and there to preach and to do this and do that. These were spiritual campaigns. Jesus had come to reach people. He wasn't just sort of randomly wandering onto the planet and hoping something would work. It was a very calculated, conscious, determined effort to plant the seeds of this realization, the vibration of this realization. Jesus didn't write or publish books because that's how you make it visible. The power that you plant is what really counts. There's a story in the life of Dr. Lewis, who was Yogananda's first disciple in America. And when Master came to Dr. Lewis's home, and I guess Dr. Lewis was still living in the home where he'd lived as a child, and Master was walking up this stairwell, and there was a landing halfway up, and Master stopped. And he said, the words were something like, a divine experience happened on this spot, didn't it? And Dr. Lewis said that when he was 7 years old, an angel had appeared to him right there, exactly where Master was standing. And Master made the statement, the vibrations don't leave. If a divine experience happens, the vibrations stay there. This is, of course, the basis of pilgrimage, where you go to places that have been made holy by divine vibrations. Ananda Village is such a place. 40 years, devotees have been living on that land and meditating there. I know those of you who swim in the sea of Ananda Village all the time, it becomes the place where you live and work. But believe me, if you live outside of it and cross over onto that property, as soon as you cross there, you know that you're in the presence of something completely else. So there's this tremendous force that these masters put into the world. So when Jesus was drawn to incarnate here, he knew he had his mission and he had to plant that energy. Just as I was saying, when Yogananda did his spiritual campaigns, he had to think, how am I going to get the attention of these American people who have these great, loving hearts, this extremely deep sincerity spiritually, and this marvelous naivete about pretty much everything. So as Yogananda said, in India, they know that realizing God is difficult. So everybody says, well, some incarnation I'll get to it. But Americans have no idea how hard it is. So they just say, sure, why not? We'll do it. You know, that's just the way we are. We'll do it. But he had to make it clear to them what it was they were trying to do. And he was exotic enough. He had his orange robes and his long hair. And Swami, it's so beautiful in the path how Swami describes how Master would rush out onto the stage and his robes would sort of flap behind him and his hair with just all this magnetism. He was just in his late 20s when he first arrived. You know, we tend to see him, it's interesting, we tend to see him as Swami saw him. Because Swamiji came the last 3 years of Master's life. In a very real sense, that's the image of Master that's been conveyed to us, because it's through Swamiji's discipleship that Master has come out to us. Not that we don't have our own relationship, but the window was first opened through Swami, and that's the view we see. So it's beautiful to contemplate all the time when he was young. I asked Swamiji once, we were in a car together, and he said something, and I made some extremely cheeky response, which I am inclined to do. And then all of a sudden, I just had this thought, is this appropriate? You know, to just be so cheeky so often. And the answer is no, but that's just something else. But in this context, it wasn't. I said, sir, did you ever tease Master? And Swami said, oh no. He said, I was much too young, and I was so awestruck by him. I never felt so comfortable that I could do that. Interestingly, Swamiji often comments to us, and I don't just mean being cheeky. He said later when he went to India, when he was a little bit older as a devotee and as a man, and he met Anandamoyi Ma, the joy-permeated mother who Master writes about in Autobiography of a Yogi. Swami says it so sweetly. He says, because I was more mature as a devotee, just older, he said, I had with Ma the relationship I was too young to have with Master. And he didn't mean guru-disciple, because he never shifted that loyalty, but he was just more at ease and just more able to, and they would joke and laugh, and it was just a little bit easier for him. With Master, he said he was always, as he put it, so conscious of being in the presence of God. But what he did say, which was sweet, he said Dr. Lewis used to joke a lot with Master because they'd been young men together. They were 25 years old when they first met, and Master was just starting out. So when Master first came and he had to get our attention in America, he did a lot of miracles. On those campaigns back and forth across the country, when he filled the largest halls in the major cities and thousands of people would come, he did miraculous things. I mean, just imagine. He did healings, he did remarkable feats of strength, extraordinary feats of personal self-control. Swamiji says he could have a different pulse in 2 different wrists. He'd get 2 doctors and they would count his pulse and it would be different. Swami says, how could he do that? You know, it's just like, but he did. And naturally, it brought people out. And then he would give them something deeper. And whether they took it now or took it many incarnations later, how many of us sitting here today were probably in one of those halls at that time? You know, and part of the reason we're here is because something went into us. Now, Jesus was also he knew how to get the attention of the times, and even more so then, because people's consciousness when Jesus lived was not subtle. You couldn't just talk about the energy nature of the universe and have everybody else just speak of Einstein's formula and all these different things. There was no new physics then. There was no physics. There was just rocks and people. And it wasn't like human consciousness had no potential, but it was a much darker age. So he had to do things, very dramatic things, like the raising of Lazarus from the dead. Another charming part of the Bible is after Jesus raised Lazarus, and he raised Lazarus, Lazarus' family was very prominent, and all of the group around knew, and the miracle took place right near Jerusalem, which was the center of power there. And after that, it was like Lazarus had been in the grave for 3 days. And when Jesus came and he said to the sisters of Lazarus, "Remove the stone," the sister said to Jesus, just person to person, "Sir, he's been dead in there for 3 days, and now he stinketh." That was what he said. "Are you really sure you want to open the stone? I mean, we might regret this." Jesus said, "Open it." And then, of course, he said, "Lazarus, come forth." And, wrapped in the winding sheets, Lazarus just gets up and walked out. I mean, put yourself there. And then Lazarus is just back at the dinner table with the family, and he's walking around everywhere. It was really hard to deny that Jesus was doing something else. And so the priests, the Pharisees, who were really nervous, said, "We've really got to get rid of this Jesus person. He's upsetting the natural order, which is to say our power and our rules. This man is causing a lot of grief." And then someone else says, "We're going to have to kill Lazarus too." Because as long as Lazarus is walking around, there's people who are going to remember this guy. Okay. So in all of that, by now, when Jesus appears anywhere, and this is the scene that's described, the people are crowding around him. They didn't have a police escort. They were just crowding around. Everybody's crowding up to this man, and you can imagine the fervor of it. And they describe in another scene where there were so many people that somebody on a stretcher wasn't able to come in, so they went up on the roof and they removed the roof stones and they lowered the sick person down. Everybody's sitting there, and all of a sudden the sick person comes down like this. But that's the energy. In the midst of all of this, Jesus makes the utterly incomprehensible remark, "Somebody touched me." And his disciples say, "Sir, were you there? Like a lot of people touched you." He said, "No. Somebody touched me." You see, this is the whole difference. Like, we just live in this world and we say we're devotees and we play with the spiritual path. I don't mean that in an insulting way. I'm saying that people do. We think we're devotees. We want to be devotees. We're deeply sincere. But there's this point where we cross over. There's this point where we finally understand, we really do understand, that it's really not about getting stronger and stronger in my own ego. These egos are useful. Otherwise, we stumble around this world. We just don't know what we're doing. But there's a point at which there's always this balance that we're acting out. I make the joking reference, I had the desire to help people, but I was such an idiot. I didn't appear to be an idiot. I was a functioning person in the world. I was very good at school. I always had this mouth on me, so I could always just sound, like this. But it was sort of the more you could do that, I could do that sort of thing, the more profoundly and deeply frightened I became inside. Because here it was, I could move through this world and people would look at me and think I was doing fine. But the more I could have that kind of power, the more deeply I knew that power wasn't ever going to solve this fear and this desire for happiness. Of course, that's what Swamiji was saying to us last night over and over again. He kept talking about nothing in this world will make you secure. And then he just very systematically dismantled all of our hopes and dreams. And the word I kept thinking of is there was rueful laughter in the room. It's sort of like you didn't know whether to weep or to cry. On one hand, it was comical the way he was describing us, and on the other hand, it was so close to the heart, wasn't it? And there was just this deep desire to have an exception. It's true, sir. Most of the time, human love won't give you the satisfaction you're seeking, except in this case. You haven't met her, sir, you don't know. And then you were just sort of like, oh. Someone said they'd never heard anyone talk so much about catastrophe with such joy. It's just like everything's going to just be terrible. And then even worse. But you see, there does just come this point where all of a sudden you realize the only reason I'm so frightened is because I'm holding on to something that's just water in my hands. Because yes, ultimately it all goes away. And that's really the entire and the only point. And we all know that. Ultimately, it all goes away. There is a story that I did put in my book about Swami Kriyananda, that this group of people, and some of you may remember a few years ago, they were trying to get a worldwide ban of nuclear weapons, which, ask anybody, that's a really good idea. What if we stop building up things that can blow this earth to bits? Wouldn't that be a good plan? Doesn't that strike you as a good plan? Of course, we share this planet with a lot of people who don't have any sense at all, and who have a lot of, just bad energy. But here we are. I've said to some of you before, a friend in India coined the phrase, there's all these countries in the world, and then there's one more country. It doesn't have a geography. It's called the nation of self-realization. And that's us. And the leaders of our country are very wise, but there's a lot of other countries out there, and they may take the terra firma and they might injure it. But this group came, and they really naturally wanted Swami Kriyananda and all of Ananda's energy behind this initiative. And it seemed a no-brainer. Of course we would want to do it. The reasons why we didn't support them were complex, which I won't go into here. But this individual came and he gave this presentation, very well worked out. And it was all about nuclear war, as if we needed convincing. And there was the epicenter of the blast, and how everybody in the epicenter would be vaporized. There would be nothing left. And then you move out a little bit, and these people would be incinerated, and so we'd have ash. And then we'd move to here, and then we'd have charred, recognizable bodies. And then here, we'd have slow death, okay? I mean, it was horrifying. I mean, it was just terrifying. And these were tens of thousands, gigantic numbers, and with charts and graphs. And when it finally stopped, and Swami was able to say anything, he wanted to be supportive, because he knew they meant well. But of course, fear as a tactic to overcome dissonance is not a really great concept. Because when you get fear, you get anger. When you get anger, you get actions you don't want. And pretty soon, in the name of your good cause, you're just the same old person. So Swamiji first spoke about fear is not such a good idea. And then he said, I loved this line. He said, look, I know what you're saying, but think about it. 100 years from now, he said, almost no one who's living on this planet will still be here. He said, and whether we dribble out over the next century or all go out in one big blast, he said, when we get to the astral world, it won't make any difference to us. You're in your body, you're out of it. It doesn't really matter how you got out of it. You're just then. And then all of a sudden you say, oh, I just took off that dress. It's just like, I'm going to go back eventually and unpin this. It's not going to be an incredible trauma when I take this yellow silk scarf off, because I'm not so confused as to think it's me. And it's just the same. You just take off the body. What difference does it make? Like that. But unless you can live, and then he said, just to finish the story, he said, I know you're trying to do a good thing, but that's when he said, if you create more fear, you're just really part of the disease. We have to do this in a different way. Now, that's what he was talking about. That's what, coming back, if I can get back to Jesus pushing through that crowd, we try very hard, and we know that grace is there. And our topic today, just to touch it, is self-effort versus grace. The key is to come within ourselves to that point of understanding that the reason I feel so nervous is because I have put my faith in the wrong things. I just am believing so much in my power to do this. And there just has to be that line that you just cross over. And Swamiji said it last night too. He said, it may not be easy, but it's so simple. And we all know it. That's what I was saying. This anxiety I felt as a young person, which increased the more capable I appeared in the world, the more frightened I became inside. Because it just, how can we ever rely on that? How can we ever rely in stopping the tides, in controlling other people's energies and protecting ourselves in all these small ways? And that's where Swami's joy came. Don't try. Be catastrophe-oriented. Just, so what? Because it has nothing to do with the source of anything. It's just this world that we live in, that God sends us into and walks right by our side. Ooh, it's just like really, it's like a giant video game. It really is. And God is working the stick. And we're one of those figures out there. You know? And now the heroine gets to go into this terrible, dark situation, and all the monsters are on her. You know, and then all of a sudden the stick moves, and oh, we're just over here again. We're light and free. Isn't that so? And as long as we're trying to make it work ourselves, that just is unbearable tension. But as soon as we just realize we're just being moved, it's like this beautiful dance. We're just being moved at all times. And there's this tremendous, tremendous beneficent power that's just always there. All those people with their anxiety were pushing up against Jesus, but one woman just walked forward with this absolute certainty of the light. And so when she touched him, he wasn't consciously trying to help or not help. Always the same energy was flowing through the avatar. The sunshine of divine bliss was always there, but somebody actually understood and reached it, and immediately I felt power go out from me. Isn't that a beautiful phrase? Don't we just long to be the one who touches the hem of the garment? And that was also what was so sweet. She crowded in and touched the hem of his garment. She didn't reach for his hand or his head, just very, very went to the bottom, touched the hem of his garment. You see, there it is, the whole spiritual path. The absolutely impersonal, constant giving nature of the divine, and the sweet humility and faith that brings that power to us. Bless you all.